Well, Briahna, I'm bracing myself for your radar. What's up?
Well, Robbie, some people are asking whether Joe Biden has lived up to his Trump-appointed nickname, Lion Biden, once again, now that his plan to cancel $10,000 of student debt for nearly 44 million Americans was enjoined by the courts. Last week, just days after young voters warded off the red wave, both an Eighth Circuit court and a Texas judge vacated a policy that served as a huge inducement to get young voters to the polls: student debt cancellation. Some people are asking, did Biden ever intend to cancel any debt in the first place? Now, let's take a closer look at how this played out. The Texas judge, Judge Pittman, argued that the legislative authority Biden used as a hook for his executive power, the HEROES Act, was too narrow. It's a post-9/11 act intended to provide debt relief for first responders and the like. The Biden administration argued that COVID was a similar type of emergency. But it doesn't take a legal expert to see the holes in that theory. As I explained over a month ago on this very program and also on my own podcast, Bad Faith, Biden has repeatedly claimed that the COVID crisis is over. Moreover, the Supreme Court, through its rulings, has indicated that it agrees, striking down other COVID-era programs like the eviction moratorium and vaccine mandates. It's obvious that the COVID hook is just a pretext for a policy that's not really COVID-based. Heck, even Biden himself has said the reason we need student debt relief is the structural problems which have led to high education costs. And he's right. But instead of using the Higher Education Act of 1965, which was designed to address exactly that type of problem, he used a legislative hook which seemed designed to fail, not just because of conservative judges, but liberal judges too. Here's what Fordham law professor Judge Sugarman had to say on my podcast a month ago.
I think the Biden administration could lose this 9-0. And instead of running against the Roberts court thinking it's a win, I think it'll be an embarrassment that actually frustrates, that alienates the base because it says you were incompetent. And that's my real concern here is I have to be, this experience of finding this problem has made me a little more cynical about what the goals are here.
Welcome to the club.
Well, yes.
And as a reminder, student debt payments have been suspended since Trump was president. And since the authority used to do so was the Higher Education Act, why would someone choose to pivot from an authority which has held up without challenge for years? The administration's incompetence gets even worse than that, though. You see, the people who have standing to challenge student debt cancellation, mostly the corporations hired to process student debt by the government, they were going to mount a challenge to the policy regardless of what legal authority Biden relied upon. That's why advocates at the Debt Collective, the leading student debt advocacy group, have been warning that Biden should not delay relief. He should just do it. Cancel student debt immediately, day one. Remember, the debt is federally held. Just like I could say, hey, don't worry about paying me back if I bought you lunch. Biden can simply forgive it. And once canceled, the debt would be exceedingly difficult to reassign. The Eighth Circuit, the first court that blocked relief, all but admitted that this was why an injunction was necessary. It's precisely because it's a policy that's very hard to undo. But Biden put his desire to means test the policy ahead of his commitment to actually making sure student debt cancellation goes into effect. By announcing it and then putting up an application and giving people weeks to fill it out, he gave corporate-backed groups angling to maintain the status quo time to forum shop. That is, to find a friendly judge and get an injunction. Instead of taxing any unfair windfalls back from the rich, no one now is going to get relief. And maybe, just maybe, this is what Biden wanted all along. Remember, Joe Biden was colloquially known as the senator from MBNA, a major bank since acquired by Bank of America, which, like many corporations, is headquartered in Delaware, where Biden was a senator for 36 years. Delaware's corporate-friendly laws attracted corporations, and those corporations elected politicians who served their interests. It's no accident that Joe Biden is why students, unlike most other debtors, find it next to impossible to discharge their loans in bankruptcy. Biden had to be dragged kicking and screaming to $10,000 in debt cancellation, and his since forgotten promise to cancel all debt for graduates of historically black colleges and universities now looks like a last-ditch bid to turn out much-needed black voters in the 2020 Georgia runoff. But like his promise to send out $2,000 checks and to fight for a $15 minimum wage, his commitment to full HBCU cancellation is never brought up by the Democratic Party acolytes who claim to care so much about black voters. In his $10,000 of student debt, the victory that he announced was about as short-lived as Dr. Oz's Pennsylvania residency. Now, when I first raised the possibility that Biden's student debt plan was a bait and switch over a month ago, I was tentative. I hoped for the best, but feared for the worst. But when Thursday's court decision came down, just days after the youth vote was shown to be the levee that stopped the red wave, it was difficult not to draw certain conclusions. Now, I can't prove anything, but a pattern is certainly emerging. Democrats authorized Cori Bush's protest on the steps of Congress and then acquiesced to her demand to continue the eviction moratorium. The left celebrated, but the next day, the Supreme Court found it unconstitutional. Would Democrats have agreed to the extension had they known that the victory would be so short-lived? Had they not known, rather, that it would be so short-lived? I don't know, truly. Similar questions are now mounting around student debt cancellation, but this situation differs from the eviction moratorium because the decision isn't yet final. Joe Biden may prove his motives one way or the other. Still to come, will he cancel student debt or not? As a lawyer for the debt collective, Sparky Abraham tweeted last week, if POTUS had just canceled student debt and announced it after the fact, courts wouldn't have been able to stop it. He can still do that. He can still do that. If he doesn't, it will be difficult for him to argue that he made a good faith effort to follow through on his campaign promises. I'm not asking anyone to take my theory here on faith, but it is important that Biden be pressured to do what he can do to save this program. And liberal apologists, I gotta tell you, you aren't helping. Blue check Georgetown professor Don Moynihan jumped at the opportunity to defend Biden, but not with an actual argument. Instead, he pretended that there was some inconsistency between my claim that it's within Biden's executive power to cancel student debt and my argument that he chose bad legal authority as a hook for said executive power, perhaps intentionally. Don's reasoning skills aren't making the best case for the value of higher education, I'm afraid. Also not making the best case, the plaintiffs in the Texas case, one of whom is literally suing on the grounds that he isn't poor enough to qualify for the $20,000 of relief available only to Pell Grant recipients, i.e. the poorest debtors. The other is suing on the grounds that she has private loans that didn't qualify for Biden's policy. And while I would happily cancel her debt if I were designing the program, my sympathy for her is diminished somewhat by her willingness to take $48,000 in PPP loans without complaint. It takes a liberal to enthusiastically and uncritically side with these characters and the senator from MBNA against millions of eligible student debtors, 90% of whom make less than $75,000 a year. Social workers, teachers, truckers, nurses, your kids, your grandparents, and your spouses. But here we are, liberals leading other liberals to the slaughter, insisting that Biden is just a stand-up, ice cream-loving guy doing his best. The truth is that there are only two options here. That Joe Biden intentionally designed this policy in a way that made it highly unlikely that any student debt would be canceled, or that his administration is filled with incompetence. And I gotta say, neither bodes well for the future of the nation.
Well, I sincerely hope this program fails. I'm not sure. I mean, this is interesting. I'm not sure that I do think Biden set it up to fail on purpose.
Why is that?
But it seems too Machiavellian for him.
Well, what explanation is there? Because there were warnings about this, right? Jed Sugarman, the law professor that I interviewed on my show, he didn't just pop up on a little indie podcast. He wrote an article in the Atlantic. He first was engaging in a different article with Larry Tribe, Harvard law professor, and then ended up getting his own spin-off article in the Atlantic, elaborating on why he had concerns about how Biden's
maybe Biden can't
designed.
get out of "it's a pandemic, I can do whatever I want" mindset. Like that's his preferred rationalization for things because that's how he's governed for the last...
Well, that would be incompetence.
Yeah.
So that's the other option.
No, that's what I think it is.
But the reality of the situation is they had been warned for a long time. The advocates over at the Debt Collective, who have been really championing this policy since long before Biden won the primary, have been very clear about what the strategic avenues are that would best lead to success. And there is a reason why they have been saying he should cancel student debt day one. At their rallies, they have a giant pen that's like the size of a man, and they hoist it around, and they say he can do it with a stroke of a pen. He should do it day one. And part of this is part of the reason that Biden has literally given challengers the opportunity to make these bad faith arguments. You don't have to support student debt to appreciate that it's a ridiculous argument to say, I make too much money to qualify for the program, and therefore it is unfair to me. And other legal experts have gotten more into the weeds about how some of the actual legal findings in the Eighth Circuit case in particular are just bad law. But that's for lawyers to work out. In the meantime, the student loan moratorium was supposed to end at the end of the year. It's unclear what's going to happen. The Biden administration has made noises about extending it, but even that can't be indefinite because that is a COVID-era program as well. And unfortunately, I think a lot of Democratic voters got duped. And they went to the polls thinking that Biden did something good for them. Young voters in particular thought that Biden did something good for them. And now there's a cover-up in place to try to make it seem like Biden was a good faith actor and couldn't have predicted any of this. And I think that's not right. And voters should know what they're going into if they're going to vote for Democrats.
Sure. I think if it makes it to the Supreme Court, which it might, I think under any legal justification, the Supreme Court is likely to find that this doesn't hold up.
Yeah.
And then Democrats and Biden will blame the Supreme Court and say you need to elect
I think
more,
that's
or you
right.
need to elect Democrats in perpetuity until we can
Like they've
replace
been
the
doing
Supreme
with
Court with
abortion
Democrats,
and-
something
yeah.
that's going to take 50 years.
Yeah, and in Joe Biden's parlance, I just happen to think that that's malarkey, and Democrats need to wake up.
All right, more Rising after this. Stay with us.